Okay, I'm Nate Mantua. I'm a research scientist here in Santa Cruz working for NOAA's Southwest Fishery Science Center. Yeah, my specialty is really how climate works, and a lot of my research is focused on the Pacific and things like El Nino and other natural patterns of climate. One called the Pacific Decadal Oscillation, which is sort of like a long-lived El Nino pattern. And also climate change, what is likely to happen to our climate as we go into the future with increased greenhouse gases and other pollutants that are altering climate at a global scale. My degrees are in atmospheric sciences related to climate, but my interest has always been in how climate affects natural ecosystems, especially ocean ecosystems and Pacific salmon and steelhead. So that is an area that I continue to work in, and the group that I lead here at the lab is focused on anadromous fish habitats in California, so salmon, steelhead, and sturgeon. Okay, so here on the central coast of California, we have a pretty interesting situation where a lot of these small watersheds still support small populations of steelhead. Some of them, especially north of Santa Cruz, have very small populations of coho salmon that people in our lab and at the state and sort of local agencies are working very hard to try and restore and recover those to higher abundances so that they'll just become more self-sustaining populations. Right now they're just hanging on by a thread, the coho salmon populations. And this is due to 100 years of habitat damage and loss, primarily, that the streams that they need for the freshwater half of their life have changed radically, mostly because of things that we've done to them to make it easier for people to live there. And it starts all the way back with the intensive logging of the redwood forests more than 100 years ago, and continue with all kinds of different things, whether it's agriculture, human development for urban and suburban areas, or even rural development, where those freshwater habitats and just the availability of cold water in the summer have just been compromised in a lot of ways. At the same time, there's lots of public land and parkland that's protected that offers some hope for these fish in the future if we can relieve some of those stresses and also get some good climate years. You know, as everyone's aware, we're in the 4th year of a very intense drought in California, and that is causing some serious challenges for our salmon and steelhead populations. They need cold water, and we are just in a situation where there's not much to go around for people or for wildlife. So hopefully that's going to change soon and give these stocks a break, let them have better conditions in the freshwater side and better access to and from the ocean. So in the last couple of years, California has experienced incredibly high temperatures, the highest temperatures in our historical records that go back over 100 years now. And that has come in combination with extreme drought from a lack of storms in the wintertime and a lack of precipitation. So it's a combination of a lack of rain and snow in the mountains, and also really high temperatures that, at least for the last 2 years, have been unlike anything these populations have experienced in centuries, probably. So it's not one thing, it's a bunch of things. And now in the last year and a half, the ocean has also been exceptionally warm, which is at record high temperatures for the central California coast. So the salmon are really experiencing a lot of stress in all their habitats for California right now. And I don't think that's going to continue on beyond this year. I think that it will change in the short term because of things like the big El Nino event that is underway in the tropics. It's likely to, I think, relieve some of the drought conditions that have plagued this area for 4 years. And I think the extreme temperatures that California has experienced are not likely to be repeated for the next year. That said, there's this longer term sort of slower warming trend that will likely go on and is likely to continue for as far as we can tell into the future because of increased concentrations of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. So that's the longer term problem. And a big question is, can we improve the habitat that these fish are using in freshwater and in their estuaries enough that their populations can get stronger than they have been really for decades. You know, they've been in trouble for a long time now, and get them strong enough that they can cope with this more gradual long-term climate change that looks to be something that, you know, we're not going to avoid unless there's some dramatic changes happening globally, you know, not just locally. But the climate change problem, it's an international problem. It's affecting the whole planet. So there needs to be really serious action taken to try and slow that process that's underway. So El Nino for California usually causes a short-term warming of our coastal ocean that begins sometime in late summer or fall, persists through the winter and into the next spring. And something that's really interesting about the last 2 years is that the ocean off of California and really the entire west coast all the way up into Alaska and then down to Mexico has been very warm for almost 2 years now, in spite of pretty weak El Nino conditions in the tropics. So in the short term, the developing El Nino that's going on in the tropics is likely to make things even warmer, probably for the next 6 months or so, or 9 months. And beyond that, it's not clear what's going to happen. In some past years, following a big El Nino winter, the whole eastern half of the Pacific Ocean has cooled off dramatically for 2, 3, or even more years. So that's something that might happen again. You know, we might get a pretty big reprieve in terms of our ocean temperature changes in the short term, starting sometime next year. Because we're right on the Pacific Ocean, our climate is just much more moderate than other parts of California. We don't have the extremes that exist once you get away from the Pacific Ocean. And in the summertime, the fact that we have a lot of days with the wind blowing out of the north, blowing along the coast, we're starting to have a little bit of that this morning, that upwells cold water, and that cold water cools off the lower atmosphere and it favors a lot of fog during the summer, and that can really moderate high temperatures during the summer, especially north of Santa Cruz. The coastal valleys where we have these streams with steelhead and coho salmon are a lot of times covered in fog for most of the day, so they don't warm up nearly as much as just over the hill or even the crest of the hills around here. The idea of acting locally, thinking globally, I think there's a lot of merit to that there are projects to restore our streams, to make that habitat better than it has been for many years in places where there are concerted efforts to try and improve fish habitat, like in the San Lorenzo River, for instance. And those things are really going to be necessary if we want fish to be around in the future as climate warms. And at the same time, trying to do things that make dealing with climate change on a national and international scale more of a political winner, I think is important, because to date, it just has not been politically something that our leaders have been able to get behind and stay in office. They just can't take those steps without getting run out, I think. And that has to change before we see some significant action. And that's my opinion. I'm not an expert on that. That's just kind of my perspective on it.